Welcome to our debut episode of Guitaraholics University podcast, where we talk about all things guitar. No lessons here. There's already plenty of stuff like that on YouTube. I suggest you go check it out. Just open, frank, and very opinionated discussions about guitars, guitarists, and equipment. I'm John Schlackman. I'm sitting here with Joe Narduli, and we are your hosts on this awesome musical journey about everything guitar. Okay, our topic for today... Actually, say hello, Joe.
Hey, what's going on, folks? I'm Joe Narduli.
Right. Our topic for today is what makes a great guitar player, or what makes a guitar player a great one. We figured it would be cool to start off our podcast with something very controversial, as guitar players definitely have opinions on this subject, as we do, and we will get into them. Joe, what makes a great guitar player?
Melody, I guess, number one for me.
Sure.
The compositional skills, songwriting, and then after that, of course, based on the fact that I tend to like more of the high pyrotechnic kind of stuff, there's got to be a certain amount of technique there. But always the technique has to drive the song. It can't be...
technique for technique's sake.
Exactly. Yeah, it has to be that the technique is there for a reason, not just to show off and do chops. I found that all of my favorite guitar players are my favorite guitar players because of their songs, not because of their playing. Although they are all great players, it was really their songs that attracted me because, as we all know, a great solo does not a good song make.
So there's no guys that you would listen to that, let's say, like Ted Nugent, let's say, who I think is a great guitar player, but except for a handful of tunes, most of his tunes, they kind of suck.
Yeah, but I mean, I would listen to it and I would enjoy it, but it wouldn't be anything that I would go after or listen to a lot or let's say be influenced by,
Yeah. Speaking about, we're talking about technique. That's a tough one with a lot of players. They feel that they're that school that's like technique makes guitar playing into a sport, and therefore it's not really something you could consider of great players like someone like David Gilmour, who's just a fantastic player and doesn't do all the flashy stuff, and the guys who are doing all the technique are just running laps and doing marathons.
Right.
Know? I mean, it's an interesting thought. I think guys like David Gilmour actually have incredible amounts of technique.
I do as well.
Right,
yeah.
It's real subtle to pull off what he pulls off and how he does it. With guys who are against the big technique mongers and the Ingways and things like that, I would say that through antiquity, with guitar players and other instrumentalists, whether it be Bach or Paganini or John Coltrane, technique plays a real major role. That ability to play super fast and make it look effortless is definitely a part of the whole enigma of the great guitar player. So I noticed that guys who fall into that camp of like, no, guys who have technique, they suck and blah, 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 and they're not really playing guitar, I think that is patently false.
Yeah, you can't make blanket statements like that.
But you make a good point that guys who are sitting there just blowing scales at 100 miles an hour.
Right.
I saw a guy on YouTube, a kid, who was playing, he had the metronome and he kept putting it up, and then I guess they had to do it electronically because it went past 108, and he was doing Flight of the Bumblebee. And he was doing it at like 223 and then like up to 500 or 700 on the metronome, and it was so fast that you couldn't even distinguish whether you could tell that it was kind of clean, but you really was just a mosh of just So I guess at that point, guitar playing is a definitely a sport.
Yeah, I don't see the point of. Personally, I just don't see the point of spending all that time learning technique when, in my opinion, the goal is to write a song that you can so that you can kind of let's say quote unquote show off that technique, but do it within the context of a song. So I tend to spend most of my time working on songs rather than working on technique, and then I let the song drive any technique that I would need in order to pull off the melody I'm trying to play or to pull off a solo I'm trying to play, but always within the context of a song. So I always let the song drive that. In fact, I found myself being forced at times to have to learn certain techniques because the song in my head demanded that I play a certain sweep lick here, or the melody demanded that I need a certain level of smoothness in this part, and I can't play it alternate picking, so I'm going to have to kind of sweep it, and that kind of forced me to learn a little bit of sweeping, you know. I would always use the songs and the melodies in my head in order to drive any technique I needed, rather than learn a bunch of technique and then try and cram it into a song just so I could say, hey, look, I know sweeping now, and now I'm going to do it all day on this song for 5 minutes, you know.
Exactly. Well, I think also when you're playing at top speed, you're playing really fast, you have to become pattern oriented. The way you position, the amount of notes you play per string, so that you're hitting, let's say, a downstroke on the next string, so that you don't flub it, so you can get optimum speed. Yeah, at that point, the musicality can kind of start to get questioned, especially if you're overdoing that, and that's sort of your main focus as a player. And there's certainly, we watch YouTube. There's certainly guys who are, there's a whole school of dudes who just shred their ass off.
Yeah, but I tend to lose my interest immediately, because if I don't hear any substance, if I don't hear a melody or a certain level of compositional sense or an interesting arrangement, all that great playing just goes out the window to me, and in 30 seconds I'm moving on to the next 16-year-old that can wipe the floor with me.
Well, that brings us to the next point, which is the next sub-subject of this, which is let's talk about some particular guitar players. Let's get opinion of why we think or do not think that they are great. Okay, so that's definitely going to get a lot of email or hate mail or love mail. What we have to say. Let's start with some of the classics. Let's talk about Eric Clapton. Is Eric Clapton a great guitar player?
Personally, I don't think so. He's done very little for me in terms of stuff I liked from him. I guess the earlier Cream stuff, he had some great tone and great playing, and he had a great attitude when he played. You could hear like a certain rawness to his playing, and the tone was impeccable. But after that, I didn't really like a lot else. I didn't like a lot of what he did after that. It just didn't turn me on. And again, the songs didn't move me. So if the songs don't move me, I don't care how great the guitar playing is.
Okay, let's talk like subjectively. Now, people consider him a great guitar player.
Okay, so yeah.
Why do you think people consider him?
Again, his stuff with Cream was seminal, and there was some really great fiery playing there with a wonderful attitude. But I guess, I don't know, after that I lost interest. And is he still a great guitar player? Of course, but just not for me. It's hard for me to be subjective about it. I don't really hear much there as far as that he's doing to me that's interesting to say, yeah, wow, that's a great guitar player. I just don't hear it.
Well, in one sense, I hear him and he sounds like a Freddie King, B.B. King type clone, especially after the 60s. But if we had to try to figure out a way to look at guitar players objectively and say, okay, this guy is great, regardless of what we think about them personally.
Right,
so we have some sort of criteria that says this is why this is great and this is why this is not great. You take a look at someone like Clapton, and this is interesting. On Facebook, there's the Guitar Players of Facebook group, and they have all these kinds of things they put out there, and what's better, Gibson or Fender, or this or that, and they have these wonderful, loud arguments that go on for days and days. And someone had posted who was a better guitar player, Stevie Ray Vaughan or Eric Clapton, and there was most people were saying Stevie Ray Vaughan and giving all this reason, blah blah blah. And I was thinking about it. Why? Yeah, okay. Let's talk about why Eric Clapton would be considered great from an objective point of view. And I came to the conclusion that it really has to do almost solely with the 1966 album John Mayall and the Blues Breakers featuring Eric Clapton, which they also call the Beano album. And the reason being is that before that album, where guitar players would play, we're talking, and now we're really in the blues format. He was in the Yardbirds, and he was basically a blues player up until he was in Cream, where he basically thought he was going to be a blues player, and Jack Bruce kind of tricked him into doing more of a psychedelic thing.
Right.
And then because him and Baker were maniacs, he basically had to break up the band because they were trying to kill each other. And that's an interesting story in of itself. But the guitar players before that would play. You had guys like Buddy Guy and these seminal blues players, Hubert Sumlin with Howlin' Wolf and B.B. King and Freddie King, and they would play, but their guitar sound was very clean. And there was, the amps had this tremendous headroom, and even if they got a little bit of grit from blasting it or something, it still wasn't. It was basically a clean sound. If you wanted a dirty sound, you could do like what Link Ray did and put a hole in the speaker, and then it would fuzz, right? And then people started imitating it.
Taking razors to their speaker.
Exactly. Yeah. And then they came up with a fuzz pedal. But basically, that was your sound. And what Eric Clapton did on that 66 record with John Mayall is he took a Marshall combo, and he cranked it on 10, and the studio engineer tried to stop him and said, I can't record this, it's too freaking loud. He said, no, it must be this way. And then, depending on what kind of go, is he had a treble booster, but and he took the Les Paul, which was not a popular guitar at that time, with double coils. In fact, they had in 66 and 50, in 60, they discontinued it and used the SG instead, which they called the Les Paul, kind of remodeled it, and then Les Paul got pissed off at what it looked like and complained. Although legend has it that he was getting divorced from his wife and he didn't want his wife to get any more money. So he said, take my name off this guitar. Wow. So they took the name off of it. They stopped calling it Les Paul and they called it SG instead.
I never knew that.
So, but at that point, Les Paul itself was a crappy seller and it was gone. And Clapton found one of 59 and he used it on this 1966 record. And when he cranked the double coil pickups and that heavy Les Paul through a Marshall cranked on 10, and he overheated the power amp stage, and some say he used a little treble boost in there to get the sound to overdrive more. But he basically invented overdrive, that creamy sound that didn't exist before that record, at least in that way. And all of a sudden, people were just like, and people thought Clapton was great because he imitated the blues guys well, and but after that, he just became this huge.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, how is he getting that sound? Kind of like what Eddie Van Halen did later on, right? With his brown sound.
Yeah.
So tell me, like, who do you think is a great guitar player and why?
Well, I grew up first listening to Jimmy Page was one of my first heroes.
Okay, why is Jimmy Page a great guitar player?
In my opinion, again, it comes down to the songs. I really loved Led Zeppelin songs, and after that, you take what he did. His solos were all really good, highly melodic, but yet highly flashy. His solo in "Since I've Been Loving You" is still one of my favorite solos of all time, and that song in general is just one of my favorite songs of all time. On top of that, you take what he did in the studio as far as his production techniques and his whole guitar army thing of layering guitars and creating sounds. Again, always for the song. And then you take the fact that every Zeppelin album was really different from the previous. All the albums all have a different sound, a different vibe. They had this progressive vibe going on, and later on albums like Physical Graffiti and Presence. So they really just ran the gamut, Led Zeppelin and Page, in a very short period of time, and did so much for guitar music in general and rock, of course. And that's why, to me, I think Page is just one of the greatest all-time guitar players. Although he is kind of sloppy. I hate to say.
I was waiting for that to come up.
Yeah,
right?
I've never seen him play well live, unfortunately. Well, then again, I'm sorry. I've never seen him live. But anything I've seen on television or whatever, although the song remains the same, has a lot of great stuff. But rumor has it that only the bass drum on that album is live. But I don't know. What the hell do I know?
No,
I have no idea.
I've heard that about a lot of acts.
But yes, but to me, Page was just an overall brilliant guitar player. For those reasons I just mentioned. After that, Randy Rhoads was one of my favorites growing up as a kid. And again, great songs, great song ideas, great riffs, and obviously just incredible playing. He kind of introduced that whole classical element even before Yngwie did.
He set the stage.
Yeah, and I guess you could say Blackmore kind of introduced that as well.
Well, right, that's true. Blackmore.
But Randy did it in that newfangled heavy metal whole thing, in the early '80s. And I loved Randy's tone, that mid-range honk he got, and he was just another, a guitar player with just a certain amount of purity. His classical stuff on the first Ozzy album on D, great stuff there. And just great song ideas. His solo in the song Sado on the second album, just a brilliant guitar solo. The solo on Over the Mountain, one of my most influential guitar solos. His work on the song Diary of a Madman with that whole classical vibe, and then just all the chordal stuff going on, the arrangements, just, to me, just great stuff. And as much as I loved Van Halen back in the day as well, I mean, look who didn't, he's another guy who just, nobody touches what he did and his level of originality on the instrument. And
you bring up something
his
really,
attitude, his feel, his vibe, just literally just from another planet.
And
Eddie
people,
Van Halen,
I think that young kids don't realize that us having grown up when that stuff hit.
Right.
It took years before people really were able to figure out what the hell he was doing.
Exactly, yeah.
And every year he would come out with a record and do something new.
Right.
That you'd be lost all over again trying to figure out what he did. And there wasn't too many people, who could, maybe the guy in like two towns over could play like a Van Halen solo. He like that kind of influence.
Right.
And then everyone, even the amp manufacturers, started putting gain stages into the amps to create that sound that he, had, taking a Strat and sticking a double coil pickup in it.
Right.
Was, even though I think Holdsworth, maybe he got it from Holdsworth, had done it earlier, it's still, he popularized it. And that single pickup, what they call the Super Strat.
Right.
I mean, he changed everything, and sometimes
he did. He really did.
Yeah, and I noticed from looking at things like YouTube and Facebook and seeing the younger kids talking about these things, he, in some ways, he kind of gets overlooked, and people don't remember.
Van Halen? Yeah.
Yeah. I've noticed he's not. Yeah, because you have so many of these really hot shot players who are kicking, and you have the whole Ingve school. Let's talk about Ingve for a second.
Ingve, a friend of mine back in, I guess I was in high school.
Sorry.
Back in, I guess it was '82. I was in high school, and a friend of mine's like, "Oh, you got to hear this guy." And he had gotten, I forgot how he got it, but he had gotten the whole of the first Alcatraz album, and again, just I was completely blown away and enamored by that album. And I think that's a great record, the first Alcatraz album. But again, I loved the songs. Solos were great. Yeah, Ingve's technique was obviously off the charts. His tone was great. That the single coil Strat tone with that, I think it was a DoD distortion pedal into a Marshall. Great stuff. And I love that record. And the whole classical thing, I was into the sound, and again, I loved the way he weaved that sound into the songs they were writing. Then there was the first album he did, a solo. I think it was called Rising Force, and that's a great record too.
Yeah, I went to Tower and got the Japanese version. I paid like $30 for it back in like '85 or '80, when did it come out?
And I found myself copying a couple of those licks off that record. It was called Dark
I saw
Star,
him with
Black
Alcatraz
Star.
too.
You did see him with Alcatraz live? Wow.
That was like he was endorsing Area Pro 2 guitars.
He was.
And he had one on. Joe is nursing the flu. He just got over it, so he's a little verklempt. We digress. Anyway, so when I saw him live, he had the Area Pro 2, like one or two of them on stage on stands. But he wouldn't touch those freaking things.
Right. He was using his Strat. Yeah.
And he used his Strat, and he was playing, and he was basically Graham Bonnet and the rest of the guys were playing the songs, and he just kind of played lead.
Right, exactly, over everything.
Everything.
He just shot his load.
I think he played like 4 or 5 chords that night, the whole night, or like an hour.
And that's
a
shame, because those are great songs, and there were great rhythm guitar ideas on those songs. And then, and like I said, there was the Rising Force album, and then the second album he did solo, which had all the vocal tunes on it. I forgot what it was called, but it had "I'll See the Light Tonight" on it and a bunch of other ones. That is just a great
trilogy.
No, that was the third album, the album before Trilogy. I forgot what it was called.
Marching Out.
Marching Out. Thank you. Yes, that's it. And that's a great record again because the songs are great, and I love the vocals. I think it was Mark Bowles on vocals. And I saw that band open up for AC/DC supporting that record, and it was just a great live set. And then you mentioned Trilogy. For some reason, a friend of mine gets Trilogy, and I wasn't interested. But he said, "Here, listen to it." And for some reason, just after that Trilogy record, I lost complete interest in Yngwie.
It's funny you say that, because that's how kind of happened with me.
And it was weird, because I said, "Wow!" I said, "I don't hear anything. I'm not hearing anything different." And I just, and the classical vibe and the classical sound was just—it's such an identifiable thing that it's so hard for him to get away from. I guess that as soon as you heard it, you knew what it was, and I just completely lost interest. And it's weird that happened, but so for that reason, I'm just not into Yngwie, and I haven't been since 1983 or 4 or so.
I think it's starting with that album. Things changed, because before that he was able to remain innovative